I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liberia to introduce an address by the head of state.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce the pre-recorded statement of His Excellency, Dr. George Manawia, President of the Republic of Liberia. I thank you.
His Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the 76 sections of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Ambassadors, Heads of Delegations, esteemed delegates, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased and honored to address the 76 sessions of the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of the government and people of Liberia. I want to use the occasion to congratulate His Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, on his elections as President of the 76 sections of the United Nations General Assembly, and convey to him Liberia's fuller support in the fulfillment of his duties and responsibility. I also wish to congratulate His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır for his distinguished stewardship in steering the affairs of the 75th sections of the General Assembly. Let me also congratulate His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres on his elections for his second term as Secretary General of the United Nations, which began on January 1st, 2022. Mr. Secretary General, I commend and thank you for your continuous diligence and commitment to the work of the United Nations and for ably steering its affairs, even in the face of unprecedented challenges. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the negative social, economic impact and health consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic remind us of the measure of work that is required at the global and national level to combat these pestilence. This is reflected in the theme for this 76th session: building resilience through hope to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainably, response to the needs of the planet, respect the rights of people, and revitalize the United Nations, and have due regards for the fundamental human rights which are enshrined in the charter of this noble institution. Meanwhile, it is important that we pay heartfelt tribute to the courageous and dedicated public health workers around the world for their continual selfless service in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The world owes to them a debt of gratitude. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this General Assembly also calls for a revitalization of the United Nations to make it more relevant and effective in the true fulfillment of its mandate in a changing world. This is a task that has been recognized as an imperative priority by successive previous leaders and members of the organization in recent times. 6 years ago, the true to the ideas and principles of its charter, the United Nations General Assembly took a giant step forward to promote the economic and social advancement of all peoples and to better their standard of living when it adopted the landmark 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This was meant to be a global plan of action for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership with the goal of eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions. However, since our transition to the decade of actions for the implementations of the new Sustainable Development Goals, the world has been engulfed by a global pandemic which has posed enormous strain on our capacity to implement the 2030 Agenda and has even raised the possibility of reversing development gains. In order to build resilience through hope, we must continue to emphasize the need for attention and support to vulnerable society and developing countries, particularly the least developed countries. Sustainable recovery from the pandemic must be based on the principle of inclusiveness and solidarity, and within the context of leaving no one behind. Addressing the particular needs of the least developed countries could significantly contribute to recovery. Support for the upcoming 5th Conference on the Least Developed Countries to be held in Doha, Qatar in January 2022. And the new program of actions for the least developed countries for the coming decades will also provide the basis for sustainable recovery and the timely implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, permit me, on behalf of the government and people of the Republic of Liberia, to extend deep appreciation to all our bilateral and multilateral development, regional, sub-regional, national, and local partners for their support in our fight against the COVID-19 pandemic and the assistance they continue to provide in our quest towards recovery. In response to the pandemic, my government, in line with our National Development Plan, the proper agenda for prosperity and development, has developed a post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan. This plan aims to reduce the impact on the pandemic by providing the basis for economic recovery through short-term action and investment in key sectors, including agriculture and tourism. On the economic recovery plan, the Liberian economy is already beginning to show signs of resurgence. And in spite of the negative impact of the coronavirus, projection for GDP growth is now positive and is expected to reach 4% in the coming year. Through the implementations of difficult macroeconomic reforms, my government has been able to obtain a substantial increase in domestic revenue generation for the first time in more than a decade. And we are committed to broader economic and investment climate reforms. In the agriculture sector, for example, my government is endeavoring to vigorously launch agricultural promotion projects, which will increase agriculture production through new entrepreneurship opportunities, innovations, and safe farming techniques. Moreover, conscious of the importance and impact of infrastructure on social and economic development has enshrined in the PAPD. Our government has identified investment in roads, energy, and ports as key priority areas. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a further reflection on the theme for this year's General Assembly highlights the necessity to respond to the needs of our planet. The reality of climate change facing our planet demands the urgent attention and collective actions of all national and international actors. We have all observed the extension of deserts and recurrent droughts in Eastern and Southern Africa. The increasing intensity and frequency of storms and floods in our region, the alarming rise in the levels of the world's oceans due to the meltdown of the Arctic, and the frequency and size of the forest fires that destroy thousands of acres of arable lands and properties. These conditions threaten our survival as inhabitants of this precious earth. In this regard, the recent re-entry into the Paris Accord by the United States of America is a decision that my government wholeheartedly welcomes and applauds, as we believe that this manifests and demonstrates the critical leadership needed to mobilize global coordinated actions. In the same vein, it is noteworthy that the President of the United States of America, in the recent nationwide address to the American people on the devastation caused by Hurricane Ida, called for immediate and urgent actions to combat and reverse global warming trends. For far too long, we as leaders, including those on my own continent, who have faced the hardest extremes of weather and climate, have been guilty of window dressing climate issues with rhetorics and passive declaration. Liberia humbly submits to this august body that now is the time for concerted and decisive actions. Liberia, for this part, reaffirmed our commitment to continue our good stewardship of our critical ecosystem of tropical rainforests, coastal mangroves, and interior peatlands. Our recent completed National Forest Inventory, carried out with the support of the World Bank and the Kingdom of Norway, revealed that Liberia is endowed with nearly 7 million hectares of forest, representing nearly half of the entire remaining Upper Guinea forest in the West Africa region. If you add to this 1.9 million hectares of agroforestry and coastal mangroves, it becomes obvious that close to 90% of our landmass sequester carbon. Our forests are the last remaining untouched tracts of forested land in this region and contain some of the highest above ground carbon stocks of any forest in the world, even higher than the carbon stocks in the Great Amazonian forest. As one of the last reserves of such high carbon stock, it is imperative that Liberia's forests are maintained in the future. My government reiterates its commitment to do so. Nevertheless, we know that many of the highest carbon stock forests in Liberia contain essential natural capital and ecosystem service benefits. Benefits which have so far eluded us as a developing nation. Liberia has a youthful population and faces enormous pressure for rapid development that provides decent jobs and livelihoods, especially in our productive sectors of agriculture and mining. Our economy needs to develop, and we want to do so sustainably. We want to continue to maintain our forests and ecosystem endowments and our incredible biodiversity as we embrace climate-smart approaches to agriculture and mining, which are our economic mainstays. However, in order to do so, Liberia needs meaningful partnership on this journey of sustainable development. Partnership with the United States as well as with the rest of the developed world, including the private sector, to allow us to leave our forests intact because of their extraordinary capacity to capture carbon for the benefit of the industrial world. We are therefore looking forward to constructive engagements with all interested parties in this regard. The impending United Nations Climate Change Conference will provide yet another opportunity to generate more ambitious climate actions and commitments. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, cognizance of the fact that growth and development is always enhanced by the existence of peace and security. Our government remains committed to the sustenance of democracy, the rule of law, and the consolidation and maintenance of peace and security in Liberia. We remain resolute and steadfast in this commitment. We thank the United Nations for its continued efforts to maintain peace around the world. With deep gratitude, we want to thank you, as well as the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, the Man River Union, and all our international partners and friends for providing the support for the peace we continue to enjoy in Liberia. We will continue to rely on that support in enhancing our capability to maintain peace in our land. Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, after the brutal civil war that ravaged our country and divided our people for more than 15 years, and which finally ended just over 2 decades ago, it is important to agree on a process that will bring closure to the wounds of the victim, and thereby guaranteeing the sustenance of peace, stability, justice, and national reconciliation. As I have mentioned during my previous address to this body, our government has already begun consultation with our national legislature, the representatives of our people in this regard. Today, we can report significant progress in that we have already received a submission and recommendations from the Liberia Senate, which is the upper house of our national legislature. We are now awaiting a similar submission from the Honorable House of Representatives, after which it is our further intention to have a wider engagement with the Liberian judicial system and with our strategic international partners and organizations. It is my hope that at the end of this consultative process, a national consensus will evolve that will determine the way forward to resolving this issue. In the meantime, we continue to encourage our citizens to utilize the Palava Hot method, where perpetrators and victims can meet in traditional community forums to resolve their issues and their differences. It is in keeping with one of the major recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was established at the end of the civil conflict. Mr. President, Excellency, esteemed delegates, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me reiterate that the way forward to a resilient post-COVID recovery must begin by ensuring that our interventions will be guided by the 2030 agenda. Ensuring affordable access to vaccines, testing and treatments on an equitable and inclusive basis, and strengthening the capacity of developing countries, particularly the least developed countries, so that no one is left behind as we strive to achieve the timely implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. These important and critical objectives can best be realized and accelerated through improved partnership and increased solidarity amongst all member states. I thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Liberia for the statement just made. The Assembly